That's an extreme example of what can go wrong. I understand that. But it's one that just kind of pops out in the newspapers. And we could, some of you have been through these, some of you some time back, some of them more recently, unfortunately. They don't usually rise to this level, but the newspapers, the press are unfortunately filled with examples of well-known national and sometimes international not-for-profit organizations where the organization doesn't do something wrong like this, fraud, wrongdoing, misconduct, but a key person, the bookkeeper, the manager, the executive director of a local chapter. And that makes it boys' clubs, girls' clubs, Red Cross chapters. I mean, the stories are just over and over and over again. But this is not the organization, it's an individual. But to me, it begs the question about whether non-for-profits are inherently susceptible to fraud and wrongdoing. I'd have to say yes, based on my background, based upon my experience. Yes. Well, what keeps people from ripping off non-for-profits? Answer. It's just the people on the inside paying attention. Well, with our friend from Family Connections, it was the one on the inside. And as I read back through stories, not just in preparation for this time of year where there's a fair amount of talking about fraud and not-for-profits at AICPA and different state societies and such, but I kind of keep an eye on this topic, and friends send me articles. There's a common theme there. While there are scams that attack from the outside, it's almost always from the inside. And so our item number 10 here, override, fairly easy, limited staff, thin controls, not a lot of fraud knowledge. I know I'm telling you things that you know, but I think it needs to be said. I don't care what type of internal controls we have or how deep we put them in and segregate as much as we can and 2 signatures on certain transactions and all the normal sort of blocking and tackling internal controls that we do, the formal structure. Most of that can be undone by the key person on the inside. Fact. If there was a fraud in a corporate, non-for-profit, education, municipal, governmental environment, if there was a fraud, there was a control weakness. Usually there's a series of control weaknesses. But what I spend most of my time doing is what I would call fraud autopsies. And that is someone else has handled all that, and with my background, external audit and then internal audit many years, I come in and try to figure out why and how and where the weakness occurred. Were the procedures adequate? Were they not? Were the procedures overridden? I mean, we put 2 signatures on certain everything over 5,000 has to have 2 signatures. That's a great internal control. If the people who sign know what to think about before they sign it. I spent a lot of time in that world. I've been keeping track for the last 12 years, what I'll call my root cause analysis of what really allowed this event to occur and go undetected for a period of time. And what I'm tracking is, was it a failure in control infrastructure, or was it a failure in the people executing the control? And I'm running about 90-10. About 90% of the time, even in our thin control not-for-profit environment, the procedures were fine. They were adequate. It was the human. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't have enough time or they didn't have the skill set, they didn't have the background. And in this autopsy, this post-event, because if you're going to do the fix to make sure it doesn't happen again, yet you have to drive, that's root cause analysis. You have to drive it to what was the real cause. And what we see is after fraud, there's all these policy changes. Okay, now we have 3 signatures on documents. But that wasn't the cause. That wasn't the real reason why it happened on the front end. So I spend a fair amount of time in that world with the starting philosophy that if there was a fraud, misconduct, or similar wrongdoing event, there had to have been a control weakness. The question was it the hard control procedures, the soft control humans, or some combination of the 2? Where our issues overlap, and that by say our issues, this is your work, my work, fraud, non-fraud, these 3 circles that are up on the screen in front of you now. The big picture is the big overriding issue on fraud and any other problem that can occur in an organization is the risk management environment. To what degree does the organization and their leaders put in place an awareness of and the actions behind risk management? That's where our issue for today comes in. The primary thing that we do about our issues is we put in place controls, human and structural controls called more commonly internal controls. The third circle on the bottom right is where we're talking about, okay, I'm aware of risks, we have procedures, but I want to layer that third bubble or balloon in there and specifically suggest to what degree are your clients and your own organizations dealing under risk management and internal controls with fraud risks. And my experience has shown me that there is not across the board depth of knowledge of fraud risks, even though there's a great deal of knowledge of other types of risks. In our nonprofit in Colorado, we have a school, and the kids in the school, it's an experiential science camp. The targeted group for this school, it's only about 1/6 of our organization, but the targeted group is junior high school students. And what we're trying to do is get them out there in the woods for overnight, often 4, 5, 6 nights in a row, especially during the summer, to experience water, snowmelt, forests. These camps are all over the U.S. in different non-for-profits. In the Chesapeake Bay, there's several. The Delaware watershed has several. Certainly in California, there's a few. In the Pacific Northwest. And the science is all local. So in our case, it's mountains. And the reason we're targeting the junior high school students is because it's at that point in time where kids, young people, are starting to begin to think through what they may want to do longer term. There's plenty of published information here in the U.S. about our need for engineers, environmental and otherwise, for scientists, for chemists. Well, this, in our little world, this is a way to maybe kind of lean some young people in this direction just by exposing them to it. And then if 10 years later, and we do try to track whoever we can, if we find out that in their university years they went into a chemistry program or an engineering, and then they may be working for a large corporation or for a not-for-profit, in that special, and we can trace that specialty back to this time. That's a success. Okay, so by implicit in this, we're running an overnight camp in the mountains with junior high school kids. We are well aware of the risks associated with that. Very careful about who comes in contact with the young people, who drives the vans, who maintains the fire control system in the dormitories where they stay, all those food quality. I mean, this is a daily risk management and all the controls and procedures around a high level of awareness. In your world, whether you are inside a not-for-profit or just as likely here serving non-for-profit clients, I would expect in whatever mission or purpose focus they have that you would see that type of high-level risk management knowledge and awareness. But what about fraud? In your clients, in your organizations, can you ever, there may be one or two, I would guess, in this room that say, yes, we have that much of a knowledge of fraud risks as we do with others. The fix, the internal controls, is to address that. Who's going to do that? Is the executive director of an organization that provides food to community members, are they going to be able to carve out an hour of their day each day to address fraud risks and the skills for their own subordinates and staff members? Not likely. I mean, who's going to lead this charge to rebalance under the concept of risk management and internal? Who's going to lead this charge? And my belief is it's us. And sort of the charge that I say to every group is don't expect your clients and your other leaders to pick up the ball on this one. They don't have the skills to do it. Even if you don't have deep fraud skills, you probably have more than they do. Fraud risk management is in part about building internal controls, procedures, and behaviors to prevent wrongful things from happening, preventive controls, and catch them right away. That's mom and apple pie stuff, nothing new there. Awareness and education is the people executing and approving transactions don't know what to do, don't know what it looks like. The controller does, the project manager doesn't. The executive director does, the camp director doesn't. Question, do you have any clients, individuals, or organizations where people have been promoted, good things, to the point where, on our topic of internal controls, they don't know what they're doing? And it takes a special person, and I'll put my nephew in this category, to say, help, show me. When we talk about solutions to protect and conserve organizations' resources from fraud risks, remember my 90-10. Most days it's the human. People are willing, they have the information, they don't know what to look for. So our sort of takeaway point from that long way of coming back around to it is for you to really look deep, particularly this time of year when we're going into year-end work for your June 30th and possibly September 30th clients, to say, do they, with the limited resources, with the tough times they've all been through and you've been through in the last 2 years, what's been the effect on resources? Time, information, people they can talk to, and expect that this year that should be a heavy emphasis point for you and your work, as a suggestion from somebody who does this full time. Focus on the skills. You don't need to put on a training course. You need to talk to individuals. If they're the bank reconciler or the reviewer of the bank reconciliation, you need to point to things on that reconciliation and say, here are 3 or 4 good questions to ask at this point in the process. You know what they're going to say? Why didn't anyone ever tell me that before? That's a sign of someone who is willing, who cares, but has moved to a point where the skills that got them there have a little holes in those skills, and we can fill most of them in one-on-one conversations. If you do the type of work where internal controls review is part of your work, your auditors are even inside as a controller, an executive director, something like that. But internal controls are that broad term, but it's kind of what you do as part of your work, is review the quality and effectiveness of procedures. Don't miss the teaching moment, the intervention moment, if you will, when you recognize that there's a need, a skill, and it's not putting PowerPoint slides together and lists of things, it is conversational. Do you ask yourself this question before you sign the journal entry? That will improve internal controls. Do you look for these things in reconciliations? That will improve internal controls.